Indy Mogul.
Alright, so first thing I have to ask about is the ring, the giant ring.
There were 12 of these rings made for the executive committee of New Line when we won 11 Academy Awards. We won everything we were up for in 2003, and we were trying to find some way to give everybody a little something that they could take with them forever.
That's very impressive and makes you look even more intimidating right over there.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
For those of you planning on going to film school one day, or going to film school this coming semester, one of the perks that comes along with that is that every so often, someone from the film industry will come in and share their stories. And that's what we have today with our guest, David Tuckerman, the former head of distribution for New Line Cinema, who was with the company in their heyday when they released the Lord of the Rings trilogy. This week, we're going to learn about his job, what exactly he did for the company, and he shares a few stories of what it was like for him on the business end of working in the film industry. We start out with a question that was submitted by Michael D. Rubeus, asking how he got into the film industry in the first place.
You can tell Michael that the first Nickelodeon that was ever in the Oranges in New Jersey was started by my grandfather. It was a family business. My uncle became a film buyer, and I always thought that was something I wanted to do. And I got the opportunity to be a film buyer, which I did for basically 27 years, until I got hired by New Line to be the vice president, senior vice president, and general manager of New Line Distribution, which is exactly the opposite of what a film buyer does. In other words, I now became the seller as opposed to the buyer. My job that I was hired for was that you take a film, well, basically what you do is you take the entire slate, and then you figure out at what periods of time you're going to release certain films. And then you pick the dates that you're going to release them, okay, and how many prints or how many movie theaters that you would take. That's what a distribution guy basically does.
Now, how long were you there for?
About 10 years.
What did you learn about film business that you maybe didn't know going in?
Well, you got to see a lot of how film was being made. Okay, although technically I'm not a technical expert about how to make a film, but you got to go on sets, you got to talk to the filmmakers, you got to see how the producers functioned. The whole other side of what it is. When you're a film buyer, you look at all this stuff without knowing anything and then make a determination of how, where you want to put a film. But when you're on the other side, you got an opportunity to see how all of it came together. And for the most part, not all of them, okay, but almost all of them, directors, producers, actors, they do not have a clue of how stuff works.
Right.
Because it's the business end. I have to decide whether there's any business in the movie.
Like, what did you have to take into consideration to make a movie a success, or at least to try and make a movie a success?
Well, let me just tell you a little something different how my job was a little bit different than the other guys at like Paramount or Sony. We had a guy that was in charge of development called Michael DeLuca, who was the Wonder King of Hollywood for a while. He was like this, okay? He was like a big entity. We never could challenge DeLuca. DeLuca said, we're gonna make this movie, and that's that. And then he went cold. And his stuff got cold. And I got there just at the beginning of when he started to go cold. And he ended up getting fired. They brought a guy in, okay, who hadn't made movies. He was in charge of music. And he was like this, okay? And what ended up happening was we took the air between this and became very powerful. They couldn't get anything made without us. This guy didn't have the gravitas to tell us. We'd say, well, wait a minute, the guy that you want to direct this movie is like horrible. He's been in director's jail forever. We used to have, although these fights, this particular fight I used to lose all the time. They would say, Susan Sarandon is a perfect example. Terrific actress. She really is a terrific actress. But she's a nut job when it comes to social, and issues, the world issues.
Okay.
And I would sit there and say, if George Bush made a statement that she disagreed with the night of our premiere, she would stand on the red carpet and carry on about how bad this is for America.
Okay.
And then half my audience would not go to see the movie. And it's got nothing to do with their talent. So I would always sit there and look, because you have to remember, I'm the business end of the stick.
I want to ask you about the concept you brought up of director's jail. Directing is probably the number one thing that most of our audience wants to do one day. Explain the idea of director's jail to them.
What happens is you have some directors that will take no direction from the studio, none. And you have some directors that will do anything that you want, okay? Anything that you want. And then what you try to do is the directors are very difficult to deal with. Unhappily, for the most part, are usually the most talented. But some people, what the hell's the guy's name? He did Magnolia for us, he did Boogie Nights, Paul Thomas Anderson. Nightmare. A nightmare.
Yeah.
Is a nightmare, okay? We would not make another movie with this guy. We don't care what it was. We don't care how much money we thought we could make. We would never make another movie with this guy, okay? Because he was a nightmare.
Yeah. There was an extra on the Magnolia DVD where it showed him talking. I mean, he was doing it as a setup, but him on the phone yelling at a studio head, screaming, "F you, I'm the final cut,
Yeah.
hanging up." So, yeah, I can imagine he wasn't the most pleasant person.
Well, what happened with him was he had Final Cut, which very few guys really get. And we showed his version of the movie to a group of people, and we showed our version to the same group, to a group, and we scored much higher, and he still wouldn't change it. But he was a nightmare, okay? And the problem with him was that one day he would come in and one day he would come in normal, and you never knew what you were going to get. One day he called me on the phone, and he wanted me to do something, and I wouldn't do it, and he says, "I'm coming down there to punch you in the nose." So I told him, I said, "Well, I'm going to lunch." It was like 11:30. I said, "I'm going to lunch at 12:30, so try to get here before lunchtime." So he came down, he stuck his head in the office, he says, "I'm going to DeLuca's office, and I'm not leaving until I get what I want." You never tell the agent, we're never going to work with him again. Yeah, well, the right thing comes along, well, let's talk about it. But the bottom line is we would never make another movie with Paul Thomas Anderson.
I want to change gears real quick. Obviously, a lot of people were interested when they heard that you had something to do with the Lord of the Rings.
Let me just go back one piece. We've got this movie. The story in the media, which wasn't actually true, was that Bob Shea had rolled the dice. We shot 3 movies at one time, and if it didn't work, the studio was going to go under. It wasn't true. No matter how many times we told the actual truth about what it was,
right.
Nobody wanted to print it because the story was so neat that this guy, this maverick, rolled the dice and the studio could collapse on it. And it was a fantasy. And at that time, a lot of fantasy movies had never worked. So I did 2 things. The first thing I did was I talked to this guy, Mark, great. This is what happens when you get old. Mark Ordesky. He was our liaison between us and Peter Jackson. He spent most of his time, he worked for us, but he was in New Zealand. So I said to Mark, I said, I got problems with all the film buyers around the country. Everybody got a lot of money in this, and nobody's got any faith in what's going to happen here. Nobody. So he said, look, you can't believe what's going on in New Zealand. I said, the whole country is mobilized. Everybody's doing something. Everybody. He said, the stuff that you see is, I said, it's unbelievable. So anyway, so what happened was we went to Peter and we said, we want to take the stuff to Cannes, okay? And we want to show something. No idea, what it was going to be. And he had shot this whole piece, which was The Mines of Moria. It was 26 minutes long. And we take it to Cannes. And the press in Cannes is like, they're just miserable pricks.
Yeah.
They don't like anything. They don't care. They went in, they came out, got back in line to go back in and see it again. It was the most unbelievable thing. Everything really broke, aside from the movie was great, but everything just broke our way on this movie. Everything we tried to do worked great. And then Peter Jackson was ordained as a genius. Mm-hmm. And then the second movie confirmed that he was a genius. And then the third movie, he was even a bigger genius.
Right.
That's it for this week. Join us next week when he gets into more questions that you guys sent in and also tells a few more stories about working in the industry. And for those who are interested in what he was talking about this week, I've included links to the uncut versions of the interview segments that aired this week. So next week we will put up even more. We'll see you then.
So Mark Ordesky, okay, is our guy who was going back and forth. Mark Ordesky and Peter Jackson. Peter Jackson was trying to sell his stuff. He used to sleep on the couch in Mark Ordesky's house. And this story is so true because I sat through both ends of it. Ordesky would bring the film up. We couldn't send it, it was hand delivered. we bought a seat on the airline. Just put the cans in the seat. And Shay would look at the movie. We'd all look at the movie. And Shay would say, go down and tell Peter Jackson, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. This is no good. He's got to change this. He's got to do this. This is a jerk around. Tell him to go, if he doesn't do it, he can go himself. And so he goes down and talks to Peter Jackson. And the conversation is to Peter Jackson. Bob thinks that maybe we could change this way, and maybe we could sort of do this. And he's not quite sure if this works. But if that's what you want to do, you can do it. The conversation, Ordesky was a buffer. And Peter Jackson would say to Ordesky, go tell that son of a that I'm going to do this the way I want to do it. And Ordesky would back to Shay and say, Peter's very strong about what this is, and he thinks that maybe you should look at it again. I mean, it was going on the whole time. It went on for 3 years. Ordesky would go down and not relay the message. And there was this one, I'm trying to remember, it's in 2. The king's son is killed.
Right.
Okay, and they bury him, and there's a shot of the king's son's burial place with this orchid coming out of it. And Bob Shay said, I won't release the movie if that orchid's there. This is the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life. And he goes down there. There was no way Ordesky could fix this. And Peter Jackson's coming back to Shay and says, I'm not going to finish the movie unless the orchid's there. So and I got to tell you, it's there for 2 seconds.
Right.
And it's just sitting there in a scene, this orchid coming out of the ground, this white orchid. It was...
Now I'm going to notice that every time I watch that movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's there.
Yeah,
it's there. I'm pretty sure it's the second one when the son comes back dead. Yeah, but it was really funny. He said, I'm not going to release it. He says, well, I'm not going to finish it.